Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm very excited to be talking with P. David Ebersole, who is an award-winning independent filmmaker and television director working in both narrative and documentary. His credits include the documentary Hit So Hard from 2012 about drummer Patty Schemel of the seminal grunge band Hole, and I definitely have some questions for you about that. Along with his husband and business partner, Todd Hughes, he's the executive producer and director of several documentaries, including the new My Name is Lopez about trailblazing Latino rock and roller Trini Lopez. His debut novel, which he's here to talk about, is 99 Miles from LA, and it's been called a fast-paced noir caper with a fresh twist, and it has everything you want in a crime story, including a bisexual love triangle and more double crosses than Pulp Fiction. And that's enough of an endorsement for me. Here today to talk about that and so much more is P. David Ebersole. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, David.
Thank you so much. You know, what's funny is that I saw your corks behind you, and now I just, got the idea of uncorking the story. There you are.
Well, in the olden days when I would do these in the same room as people, we would enjoy a bottle or glass of wine when we had these conversations. But doing it on Zoom, I'm a little self-conscious about drinking alone. So
I would have brought it along. I would have shared it with you.
There you go. Well, I always start these off with the same question, which is, tell me, David, where does your story as a storyteller begin?
Well, I mean, it goes all the way back, I suppose, to when I was a young performer. But I think it was around high school when I really realized that I didn't want to be on stage. I wanted to be on the other side. And I directed a play. Shadowbox, that play? It was a Pulitzer Prize winning play. And we jokingly called our version of it Shallow Box because we were a little too young to do a great job on it. But it gave me the bug about being, on the other side and presenting material. I went to UCLA as an undergrad in English literature. And that's when I think I really began to think that would be the path that I took in life, would be writing and emulating, what I was studying and loving so much. But I took a huge left turn and went to New York, enrolled in NYU Film School, and I did my first films, which I wrote myself, directed, and edited. And that's, I think, when I would say I started to get the feeling that I could write.
Why did you consider?
I did a short film called Loverman. And it won Best Film, won all the awards for undergrad that year. And I had made it in a closet by myself. I mean, I had no idea if it was good or bad, no idea whatsoever. And then we went to the awards ceremony and it swept. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is my path.
How did that change your life? I mean, how did winning that change your life?
Well, it really was validation that somebody else would see what you're doing and think that you could do it. And especially at such a prestigious school as NYU Film School. I mean, the legacy that goes behind that, when you win an award like that, it begins to make you feel like, okay, maybe I even have the ability to make a career out of this, not just, that I enjoy doing it and that it's been fun for me, but that I can follow up behind it. Now, I was 23 years old, so I was young and dumb, and I came out to Hollywood and got kind of beaten up for about 5 years. And I had this skill, which was editing. And so I went back to New York, worked as an editor. And I think that's when I really learned a lot about storytelling, because an editor is the person who puts story together, communicates, and makes sure that that the viewer, that the audience understands it. So that background, I think, has added immensely to what I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways, the editor is the unsung hero. You don't see the editor, especially if you're a fan, if you're a viewer, if you're a reader too. I mean, I could say this about book editors as well. You don't see them. I mean, you see them in the acknowledgments, right? But the director gets obviously a lot of credit, your talent, your actors, but the editors is kind of unsung.
Right? People are very aware of cinematography, but editing and sound, I would say, is the other thing that people just don't quite know how it works and how it enhances.
Right. Well, it's those technical awards at the Oscars that they always give out, at another time, before the show began, we gave out. And I'm a sucker for sound in a movie. I mean, I don't know. I pay attention to it, and it can make or break a movie, especially. Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Why did you consider going to NYU a left turn, from UCLA?
Well, I was in my third year at UCLA, and I think that if I thought I was going to do anything media related, it might have been journalism, because you're studying words, and I don't think that I was thinking about the screen at all at that point. What happened was is that I got an internship at Cable News Network in New York right as it was launching, and it was in the basement of the World Trade Center. So I went and I worked there, and one of the first things that happened was that they move you around from desk to desk, and sometimes you help to write copy, and sometimes they send you off on an event. But they sent me into the editing room to help put together the packages. And that's when my brain went like, oh, wow. So all the words, all the images, everything comes together in this room. And there was an opportunity to do a class called Sight and Sound at NYU. And it was sort of like the introductory level, but you didn't have to be enrolled in the summer. You could do it as a special class. And so I decided to extend my stay in New York. I stayed, did Sight and Sound. And then if you've done that class and there are openings in the fall, you can get directly into the program. And so I just kind of, from that experience, decided, well, why don't I go that direction? Right. It wasn't a plan. Like, it's not one of those things that I dreamed about when I was a kid, or, my husband actually had a Super 8 camera and made movies since he was, in high school, junior high. But I wasn't that AV kid,
Right. Yeah, my friend Nick made the mistake of leaving his big camcorder over my house. And my twin brother and I took it, and we made movies all weekend with the darn thing. Right. and to this day, we watch those movies now, and they're horrible. I mean, they're funny, but they are, but we made a whole series. We made like 7 or 8, films from this one stupid thing. It's all because Nick left his video camera at my house.
I was like I was in a band, and I wanted to be a singer. And it's funny because, of course, the main character in my book is a failed singer, wants to be a singer, ends up an adjunct professor at UCLA. So you can kind of see a bunch of the strands coming together. Sure. There's somewhere around Truman Capote and maybe a little bit before, they came up with this term autofiction, autobiographical fiction. And I think this kind of falls into that, which is that I use so much from my real life, but so much of it is not me. I mean, I didn't kill someone for a buried treasure yet. But
there's always time. Yeah, I did something similar. I wrote a book years ago called All the Fucks I Cannot Give. And it was very much autobiographical fiction, to the point where a lot of my friends and family had some very big questions for me. Yeah. They're like, is your wife really a lesbian? And I'm like, well, we're not going to address that here. But
no, I always say chapter 15 is the dangerous chapter, for my family to read. And, so you know that you're revealing yourself, you're putting things into the story that are actually like a little bit dangerous for you. But I always say when you feel scared is when you should write. That's exactly when you should sit down and say, I can't keep that out if that makes me nervous.
Right. Yeah. I was listening to an interview with David Bowie earlier today. And he was saying, hey, if you're not doing something that's making you a little bit scared, you're not going to be creating great art. And I'm like, wow, that is, a profound statement. Yeah, it's a profound statement.
Can we put on the front of my book, David Bowie says this is great art, because he was scared.
Right. But, I just wouldn't quote David Bowie in 2022. Wow. Then people might know that something's up. What is the band you were playing in? I imagine you were in a few, but what kind of music were you into when you were playing in bands?
The band was called Atmosphere, not the Atmospheres, not Atmospheres, just Atmosphere. And it was, we did hits of the day, so we did Led Zeppelin and Steve Miller Band, and we played, it was junior high school. into the beginning of high school. And so, we played all the kind of late 70s, early 80s covers.
Very cool. Very cool. My kind of music right there. I have to ask before we talk about the book about Hit So Hard. And I'm curious, why the focus on the drummer? Because, you think of Hole, I immediately, of course, go to Courtney Love and that sort of roller coaster of a life that she had. So what was your interest in Patty Schemel?
Well, Patty actually was a neighbor of ours. And she came over one day with literally a gold box filled with high 8 tapes that she had shot when she was on tour with Hole, with the entire grunge movement playing, all the paloozas back then, and all of those great festivals in Europe, and all of those bands that were traveling and interacting with each other. And so they were just this treasure trove of never before seen moments from backstage, from hanging out with people. And she lived with Kurt and Courtney for a short period of time, actually just after they had the baby. So she had this, amazing footage that has now been seen, but had not been seen since, when we started making the film. Patty actually came to me as a professional filmmaker asking me, can you help me get this onto a stable format from high 8 tape onto something digital? And so she was coming over to my house every day and we were transferring. And I started to get kind of mesmerized with the footage and what we were looking at. I told her I thought she had a documentary. At that point, I had not made a documentary. And she went away and came back and said, I really need someone I can trust to do my story. Would you be willing to do it? Patty ended up from playing stadium rock with, every band that we've heard of that era, to being homeless on the streets of LA because she had kind of, fallen into her addictions. So it was a dramatic story that was different than Courtney's dramatic story. We find, Courtney is one of those people, she burns a hole in the screen. I mean, she is star power. And it was very interesting to try to make something that had her in it without letting her take over the movie.
Yeah.
Also, I think Patty's story is extremely relatable. She's just a young girl from Marysville who happened to be the girl who could drum, who became friends with Kurt Cobain before he was famous. So they all tracked her. And when they were hiring musicians for their bands, everybody wanted Patty. And so here she is just this, young outsider. She was openly gay. Even back then, she was, struggling with it, but came out to her parents. She had that in her background already. And then suddenly this world of misfits just lifted her up and put her in front of, close to millions of people. So it was a provocative story, we thought.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Let's talk about 99 Miles from LA. So I'm curious, what kind of gave you the thought of, hey, after kind of being a filmmaker for so long, why a novel? Why now? And why this story?
Well, if you go back to those roots that you were talking about and go back to, my days as an English major at UCLA, to me, that was always the dream, was to write a book and have it be on a shelf in a bookstore next to authors that I admire. And, that someday, here I am, what was I, 18 to 20 something, that would happen for me. As I say, I kind of took this left turn into filmmaking, and that's been a great career in what I've done with my life and for my life. But that dream kind of never went away. And so that crazy little thing called the pandemic came along and we all had time. And I had been ruminating about the story. I went to see Johnny Mathis live and had never, seen him before. And he sang the song 99 Miles from LA, and I hadn't heard it. So I literally held up my phone and taped it because I just thought it was so romantic and haunting. And it stayed with me. So that was 5 years ago. And as I was kind of ruminating on the song, it's a song about kind of desire and the hope that this relationship that seems kind of doomed and failed will work out. But you kind of feel even in the song that the person is not going to be there. He keeps singing, please be there, 99 miles from LA, please be there. And you kind of feel like, no, this relationship has run its course or gone down the spiral in some way. And so that was the impetus for the characters that I was putting together. But I happen to be kind of a noir lover. And so I love a crime story. And one of my favorite authors is Jim Thompson. So that's kind of what I wanted to kind of do with it. Giovanni's Room is my favorite book, and that by James Baldwin has a kind of similar romantic, tragic undertow of crime to it. And so I started putting all of those elements together, and I write in what I call tent poles. So I know, well, I have to make these three characters meet. They have to not know each other. They have to decide to commit this crime. They're going to run away to the desert and hide out in Palm Springs. Things are going to go wrong. And that's what I know as I go into it. But when you draw characters very strongly in your mind, they start to talk to each other. So I didn't really have that much to do. I just would put them in the room together. And then these people would start telling me, how they would react and what they would do, jumping off the page at me. So that was the way it came together.
Yeah. I mean, it's always interesting to me because I typically write from an outline. So I'll know, and it's not like very prescriptive. It's not handcuffs. I mean, I'll know kind of where the big beats are, where the twist will be, because I write a lot of comedic mysteries. But what I'm always fascinated by, even writing from an outline where I know kind of where everything is going, something always surprises me as I'm writing characters, because then you have to go back and revisit some of the earlier stuff because the character has changed somehow in your mind.
Happens, right?
So you almost got to go back,
Right. And seed is what I say. Like you go, oh, okay, I've come up with this idea now in chapter 20. And I don't want that to just come out of the blue. I'd actually like that to be something that if you were paying attention, that there were things earlier that would have led you to say, that's natural that it got to that point. So the way I also write is that I write in what I call in rhythm. So I can't really write more story without going back to the beginning and writing all the way through, changing little details. Now I'm ready to go on. I can figure out where I'm going because the whole thing kind of chugs and gets going again for me. So I do a lot of honing of the early part, rereading, going back through, and then jumping forward in the story. And I rarely get stuck. I mean, I haven't really had that experience where I say, I can't figure out what happens next. It usually feels to me like that comes out fairly easily. This is my first novel, but I've been writing now since I was some 20 years old. So writing is a very natural process for me. Figuring out how to put it into book form was very fun and very new.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm jealous of people who can write non-linearly because I'm very much like you, where I'll write and then I'll always go back. Before I start writing something new, I have to go back and make sure everything that I've written before is tight, or if it's where I want to be, before I can write something else. So it's a longer writing process. But I know people who, they could start writing at any different part, in their timeline. And I'm like, I can't do it, but, God bless you if you can.
Yeah. Or they know a scene that they're going to want. So they go, I had that idea for the scene. I'll just jot that out for myself. And I know I'm going to use it later. My husband, Todd, has what I call zero writer's block. So he can just sit down and go. So we have very opposite skills. And that's why we've always worked very well together in the films that we make, because we tend to edit ourselves. And as I say, I think editing is where you really write. So, he is very fluid, very fast, and can build any sequence. And I'm very careful and slow and start going like, wait, but that can't be said before that is said, and let me move that over and scratch out that little bit and move on, and then I can go forward. So it's been complementary, which is good. On this, you're all on your own. You have to go write a book and put your own goddamn name on it, right?
That's right. There's no writer's room. There's no collaboration. It is a lonely and it's an individual process.
Unfair.
So, I mean, I know you're sitting in Palm Springs now. I've never been to Palm Springs, and I know 99 miles from LA is Palm Springs. I've never stepped foot in the town. I mean, I've seen it because I used to watch a lot of 90210, and I think Dylan McKay had a place in Palm Springs, and I think they spent a summer there. But tell me, why was Palm Springs sort of the setting of this for you? What was that? Where did that inspiration come from?
It's an interesting place for noir, I think, because it's one of the things that I think noir is really about is that the system, the culture, and the American dream, if you will, has kind of fallen apart for at least, if not everyone, at least for these characters. So they don't believe anymore that they can get ahead by going through the proper channels of work hard and you will be rewarded. They start looking at the dark side and start saying, well, what if I commit a crime? What if I crossed over the line and I'm willing to take that risk to see if I can get what I want out of life? And Palm Springs is a very interesting place because it's a mid-century modern oasis in the middle of a desert. If you step outside of it, you realize what a false environment has been created here. And this these world of mid-century modern is the American dream. It's the 1950s, 1960s, sleek, gorgeous, idea of what life should be. Yet it's also kind of a gay mecca and a mecca for outsiders and, people escaping their normal lives. So it has all of those things going on for it as just a location. The other thing I think that's really interesting about it is that the bright light, the heat and the bright light is actually a kind of dark element, right? It's not the same thing as someplace where it's like, isn't it just sunny and beautiful all the time? It's like brutally hot when it is light and bright. And so the dark and the light kind of exist together at the same time, and it creates all of these great hard shadows. So it feels like the world of noir before you've even started, I think. So I think that was where living here and being a part of it and being a part of the community, all of those things kind of run around in your head, and then you start applying them to your characters.
Yeah. Fascinating. What's the drive like between LA and Palm Springs? I'm a big road trip guy, but I'm curious what that drive is like.
Yeah, it's supposed to be under 2 hours, but now, it can be 3 to 4 hours depending upon traffic. One of the big problems is that as you're coming this way, there's the 15 that goes north and that goes to Vegas. So coming from LA to here, you're dealing with that traffic. We've also become extremely popular in Palm Springs. So the tourist community has gone hugely up. But it used to be that we could get here in 90 minutes from Silver Lake, from the east side of LA to here, you just buzz out. You can still do it at certain times of the day, but it can turn into a 3-4 hour nightmare.
Yeah, geez. I lived in Agora Hills for 6 months, and I used to commute to downtown LA every day. Yeah. And that was, so I know a little bit firsthand of what LA traffic is like, but that's
part of it, is that LA is a city spinning over at this point. They've gone way up high and haven't really thought about what to do with everybody. So live, work lofts all over town and no parking and nowhere for people to, the streets didn't change. So I grew up there. I'm a Hollywood boy. I was there from, I actually was born at the UCLA hospital, but my family kind of moved back in 1970. And I lived my whole early years in Hollywood, in and around Hollywood. There's a lot of that in the book because, again, I sort of used my early years. But so it was a really different city. It was a sleepier, easier place to live. And I think it's become this megalopolis at this point. We used to, when I grew up, you maybe went as south as Wilshire Boulevard as like sort of part of what was considered LA. Now LA is vast, and you didn't go to the valley, right? Hollywood boy didn't go to the valley. Well, now it's all part of one big, huge city.
Yeah.
And I don't think that those delineations exist anymore, where people would say, well, I go here, but I don't go there. You use the whole city.
Right.
But it made it massive.
Massive and no great public transportation. That's one thing that I think New York, you've got better weather, but New York, I think we've got the public transportation. I wouldn't say down, but it's certainly a little bit easier to get around.
It's a car culture, but the other thing is that it's a city that's very much separated by economic status. And so, the poor people in Los Angeles use the transit system. If you go on the subway, which they have built now, which connects a lot of different areas, it is like, it's almost like New York, it's shoulder to shoulder. And the bus system that does run around is very populated. It's just that there is a whole sort of level of economics that keeps many people from ever going anywhere near that. So, and then that means everybody's in their cars by themselves, and that means that the traffic is misery. The last 5 or so years that we lived in LA, we lived in Marina Del Rey, and all our friends are on the east side, Silver Lake downtown. And if you get invited to a 7 p.m. dinner party, you can't get across town. I mean, you have to leave at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, go over and kill time. Because if you try to leave at 5 for what should be a half an hour drive, you're 2+ hours.
Yeah.
So,
oh gosh.
And part of that desire to get out of LA is part of what the book is about. Because these are all 3 characters who have come to LA for their various reasons of believing that they could get ahead there. And all of them have had their dreams kind of fall apart on them. So here they are kind of struggling in this city that doesn't work and doesn't give you what you need from life. And they're desperate. They want something.
Yeah. And they turn to some nefarious means, it sounds like.
Right.
So we're going to wrap up pretty soon. I have a few kind of fun questions for you. Before I do, I need to ask, because I saw it in your IMDb, Room 237. What was your involvement in Room 237?
So Tim Kirk is the lead producer on that, and Rodney Asher is the director of it. And they're really the creative genius behind the film. My husband and I came along. We're very good friends with both of those guys. And so we were watching cuts with them, and as you do with your good friends when you're filmmakers, giving advice. So we were very involved in seeing it early, but we got involved in the end game, which is that it got into Sundance and became a sensation. And they had made it without thinking that would happen. So they had no idea how to clear that film and sell it. So we had done a lot of what is called fair use work, and being close friends, being super familiar with the process and what the movie was and how to protect what it meant. Because if you start saying, well, you can't use that image because you'll have to pay too much money for it, you start reshaping and changing the content. And so as executive producers, we came in to help protect that and help the movie go to marketplace.
Because I remember watching it a few years ago, and I'm like, I just mesmerized by it because I love the book, The Shining. It's one of my favorite books. As you know, and the follow-up, Dr. Sleep, is good too. But the movie obviously much different than the book. And I know there's Stephen King didn't necessarily love the original movie, but I remember as a kid,
Stephen King hated the original.
He did hate it. And by the way, the one that he did like with Steven Weber, love Steven Weber, not a great miniseries. But I remember as a kid in the early 80s going to the movies, and I think I was seeing, I'm pretty sure in my head, and I don't know why the preview for The Shining was at this movie, because it was The Return of Maxwell Smart, otherwise known as The Nude Bomb. The movie itself was kind of a bomb, but I was a kid. It was funny. But but in the previews was The Shining. And I remember the blood coming out of the elevator, and it scared the hell out of me since then. And that image has been burned into like my brain. But man, what a
fair use. We couldn't use imagery from the movie because we had fair used it in order to make a trailer and have it be quote unquote legal, we had to come up with an idea. And Rodney, genius again, came up with the idea of just blood beginning to pour out of a VCR where the movie Room 237 is playing, until it takes over the whole room. And everybody knows that image and knows that scene and knows what it is.
Yeah, no, but great. That was, I really enjoyed that documentary. Certainly now without its controversy and its conspiracy theories, but it's excellent. All right, so some fun questions I have. I ask everybody these questions towards the end of our time together. First one being, what was your favorite TV show or some of your favorite TV shows when you were a kid?
I loved Rhoda. And I used to beg to be able to stay up late enough to watch Rhoda. Everybody loved Mary Tyler Moore. But I don't know what it was about that show that I was like, that's my favorite show. And my parents would kind of let me stay up longer. I'm trying to think of what else. I watched all those 70s TV shows, though, like, The $6 Million Man and Charlie's Angels and Love Boat and, all the classic kind of 70s stuff. I liked the Brady Bunch. I don't think that I was, running home to watch it. No. But, it's like it was cute and fun. But that was really that's what I grew up on.
My wife was a Brady Bunch savant. I mean, she could chapter and verse. Whereas you mentioned Love Boat, one of my favorite shows of all time. I mean, I started rewatching it during the pandemic, and it's cringeworthy now. I mean, Dr. Bricker Yeah, he Me Too's a few ladies on the Pacific Princess, but it doesn't really stand the test of time in that regard. But I'm a sucker for anything with Charo in it too.
Yeah.
We talked about music before, but if we were to look at your iPod or your phone or any of your favorite playlists, what artists would we find these days on
my favorite stuff is actually kind of folk music. So I'm a Joni Mitchell, Nick Drake fan, and I play those things over and over and over again. But I also am a bit of a fan of that. I mean, a major fan of that whole kind of Bacharach, Dionne Warwick era. And we were lucky enough to have Dionne Warwick in one of our last films, House of Cardan. And I have to say, I meet a lot of celebrities doing what I do. That was the first time that I just got weak in the knees and wasn't sure if I could do the interview. I was like, oh my God, it's Dionne Warwick. And she came in with a fur coat on. We were in New York. She had a fur coat that was, shoulder to floor length, and those cheekbones rising up and those eyes looking at you. And she's so kind and such a nice person. Dionne, today we've stayed friends, and she texts me and I'm still like, wow, I cannot believe my life has come to this point where Dionne Warwick knows who I am.
Right. That's awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I remember seeing Burt Bacharach pop up. I think one of the Austin Powers movies. He was he had a cameo.
Right, I want to say,
right, playing the piano in a car or something, if I remember correctly. But
yeah,
all great stuff. Well, thinking about writing, how do you feel when you're staring at a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen, depending on how you write? Your job that day is to write something, but the screen or page is blank. What goes through your head?
I mean, the first thing that I think about is opportunity. When you say that and it's blank, and I'm going to look at it and think about what's going to happen, I just feel like that's an open world. So I know that there are some people who like that gives them fear, right? That gives them pause and, anxiety. But I actually feel like, well, that's the moment that you can be completely in control and create. I teach film, and one of the things that I talk to my students about is that the screen is blank until you put something on it. So, every inch of it, every part of it is your responsibility. And with writing, even more so, because you won't have this whole collaborative crew who's going to come in. You aren't going to have actors to come in and help you fill it up. You have just the page, these little black and white scribbles or, typewriter marks, as it is these days, that communicate. And then they go into somebody's head and they see it. So to me, a blank page is opportunity.
Yeah. That's the one thing about writing, especially like long form fiction, that's no one really gets to see it until you're comfortable with it, which could be years in the making. And you won't really get feedback on it for a long time because, you send it to friends, and I never trust what close friends say anyway, right? But maybe you send it to a content editor, and that's when you're getting your first kind of dose of reality. But it is a long, long process. Versus, writing something that is performed in front of you.
Yeah.
You're getting feedback like almost right away. You're getting some kind of feedback.
And almost too much. I mean, that's part of the other thing about screenwriting is that a screenplay is a blueprint. And so the point of it is for everybody else to be involved and tell you what it should be. The book, people are very respectful of allowing it to be yours and your own. And they don't really want to over muddle it. What I found from showing it to those early readers was you learn what isn't working, because if they stumble on something or they don't understand something, you have more work to do in that area, not necessarily I have to change or fix that to what they say. It just means that wasn't coming through.
Yeah. What lesson about writing a novel do you feel like you learned or had to learn the hard way?
About writing a novel, I think what was harder for me as someone who only does screenplays up to this date is that what you write in screenplays is what you see. You can only write dialogue, what people say, and what will actually be on the screen. Inside of a novel, you're going off into thought. You can go travel off into history. The whole idea of flashbacks is a whole different thing. It's character history, not necessarily just, a flashback of an image of, she was abused as a young girl. No, it's like, what was that story that happened to her back in those days? And you have time. And there are no rules necessarily to what can be done or has to be done. So it's very open. And that being true was both freeing and something that I really had to kind of get used to.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you're not worried about budget, right? You're not worried about, how are we going to pull this off? Right.
That's great.
Right.
Right. For once, I don't have to worry. Like, how much does it cost to get that, I don't know, grand hotel room? Who cares? Throw it in.
That's right. Right. Yeah. Versus I was talking to somebody who, he wrote, remember the show V back in the 80s? It was a mini series. Mark Singer was in it.
Yeah.
So he wrote an episode of it, and he was saying, yeah, I wrote a helicopter scene, but we couldn't get the budget for the helicopter, so we just used a pickup truck. I'm like, well, that takes a little bit away from what that scene could have been, but you don't have those handcuffs, when you're writing
that's very
fiction.
true.
How about this advice that you would give an aspiring author? What based on kind of what you've learned, over your career. Somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I'm going to write a book, or I'm going to write a screenplay. What advice would you give that person?
I would say the most important thing is to just do it. I mean, you put so many roadblocks in your own way to stop yourself, and you can listen to so many negative voices even as you're doing it. And then you start maybe talking to friends or telling people what you're up to or what you're trying to do. I mean, as I was writing this book and saying I was doing crime fiction, my stepfather said to me, like, well, what do you know about crime? You should write about what you know. And I'm like, well, the whole book is really, hidden versions of myself. So it is what I know. But I mean, there are all those things that come up. Someone will always say something to you that will help you to stop. So really the important thing is you've got to power through. You got to get through. You got to get to the end. And then you can go back.
Yeah. How about this? If you could write a letter to your younger self, to that, maybe that person in high school or wherever, whenever, what advice would you put in that letter for your younger self? What would you tell your younger self?
I saw this question from you before, and I was trying to think about it, right? And I thought, the interesting thing for me is that I think that I'd like to get a letter from him today giving me advice, because he was very free. He was very happy. He was very happy-go-lucky. I'm, riddled with anxiety and worry and, of an adult world and of an adult life. And so, I'd love to open up something from him telling me today to hang on to sort of what I had when I was his age, because I don't know that he has that much to learn from me today. If anything, it's just that thing that I think is classic, which is that, you just don't have as much to worry about as a kid that you think you do with other people and interactions. And you get so comfortable with yourself as you get older, and you're so uncomfortable with yourself when you're young. But he was a very happy kid.
Well, I love the twist on that question. Your answer to that question, wanted to get a letter from your younger self versus writing one. I that's fascinating. And that's a nice twist to end on, I think.
Right. I don't know if he would have thought to do it. He was pretty irresponsible, but.
Well, the book is 99 Miles from LA. It is out May 17th. The author is P. David Ebersole. David, where can people go to learn more about you? Do you have a website, social media you could share?
Yeah, EbersoleHughes.com, which is my last name and my husband's last name. That's our company, the Ebersole Hughes Company, and all of our films and all the different things that we've done. For the book, there's an Instagram account for it. There's a Facebook account for it, and it tells all the upcoming readings and things that we're doing. I take off on a trip across the country on June 1st, going into different towns and different cities, to do either readings or house parties or alternative events. And so we're doing that June and July, ending up in Provincetown. That's our bookend.
Very cool. Now, you're going from one end of the country all the way to the other, and with
the two beautiful girls in the back seat, and husband in tow, and books in the back. We keep saying it's like being a traveling salesman. You're like, I got a book for you. Come over here. I'll sign it for you. $20.
Well, there's a great bookstore on the way up to P-Town in Chatham, Massachusetts, called the Yellow Umbrella. So.
Okay. I'll look at it.
It's a great little bookstore, kind of hole in the wall. My favorite place is to kill an afternoon. Definitely check that out. Well, David, thank you so much.
Also, even in towns where we don't have readings, I think we're going to do that thing about stopping in, because I can always sign a couple books and leave them, right? So I think we're going to make it a little indie bookstore tour. That's one of the things that's been fascinating too, learning the business, and that it really is great and better if people do buy the book from indie bookstores instead of just going onto Amazon and ordering it. Amazon is great, and it's a great resource for everybody. but all the indie bookstores carry the same titles. You hit click, order, and it comes to your house.
Yeah. And if they don't have it in stock, they'd be happy to order it for you.
Yeah.
So very good. David, thanks you so much for stopping by to chat with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on. Appreciate it. It's fun.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.